let's take a chance to talk about visualization for the web. We'll talk about some of the front-end technologies, some of the back-end technologies, and how those really fit together. We want to understand kind of how they're talking to each other, and then we can make informed choices about what kind of back-end, what kind of front-end we might want to use. So the first, we're talking about back-end, front-end. We're really talking about the web stack, and the front-end is the web, right? Why do we care about web visualizations? Well, in the modern enterprise and in really everywhere, web visualizations are where people are consuming visualizations and where they're being produced. There's still, there's still print media, and there's still PDFs reports being passed around, right? But the way things are going is the web, and that's where we want to deliver our modern data visualization systems is in that environment. So there are a lot of browsers out there. Working with Internet Explorer can be hard, so I'd say it's not our friend. If you have to support a lot of different use cases, people on different devices and things, right? You might try tools like Browser Stack to make sure things work in different environments, or have a bunch of different test devices in those different environments. Here, right, I tend to work with Chrome, Mozilla, Safari. Maybe you're more privacy oriented and want to use like a DuckDuckGo. Any of those choices, right? These are what we're going to be using in the front end, and these are the browsers. So the browsers are what implement the whole front end side, and we'll dive into that a little bit more. So the fundamentals: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? Heard them again and again, right? D3 is JavaScript, right? Interacts with HTML. CSS kind of lives in there to do some styling. And all of this interacts with the DOM. So the DOM is a document object model, right? It is the HTML. HTML is an XML spec. So you see the HTML brace tags, right? That's XML, and it's just a spec. So the browsers actually implement how to take HTML, this document object model, and render it into pixels for a user. So here's what some grainy HTML looks like. Right? This is a boilerplate HTML template. Right, you've got an open HTML tag, you've got a section, an XML section for a header, you've got a body, right? Bodies where you're going to put most of your stuff. There's even a little bit in here to try to shim the JavaScript and the page to work for things on less than IE9. Right, it's going to go load some JavaScript that will try to make things work there. Right, this is a basic page. This is the HTML. It actually is this text, this section of text, right? CSS, right? If we've got like a menu here, this is a bootstrap drop-down menu. What CSS is going to do is tell the browser how to style that. So actually, what we're looking here, each of these buttons on the drop-down is a link, and they're styled like this. They're in a nav. They're in a list inside of that nav. We're doing something with a nav class, right? .nav. They're in a list element, and they're a link element in A. Right, so they get these three styles. They get a relative position, a block display, and some padding. So that's why they're not running into each other. They have a little bit wider on the sides and a little bit more on the top, or 10 pixels, 15 pixels. Right, you can specify each of the four sides if you want. This is what CSS does. Right, we can build a template for a whole web page, or the style for a whole web page like this. So Bootstrap. Which this is, has both CSS and JavaScript components to, give you the building blocks of a list, so or a drop-down menu here. So you can go and just write the HTML, and then the CSS will go lay that out to look like this nice-looking menu. So right here, this is the drop-down toggle. So this got applied. So JavaScript, JavaScript is, what is it? It's a dynamic programming language that can bring interactivity to websites and other things. It's not actually a subset of Java. It's not really related to Java at all. It's actually an implementation of the ECMA script standard. ES6 is next, and even now, is actually pretty commonplace. That is the latest evolution of JavaScript. So it's ES6, ECMA script 6. And JavaScript does a lot of different things, right? There's last time I checked, there were 230,000 packages out on the NPM, the Node Packaged Module repository, and there are all sorts of things out there, right? They can run web servers on one side, and on the other side, right, they have a I just looked, a random one was a CLI tool for running UManage animators. I don't know what that is. There's just a lot of stuff out there, but it's all pretty powerful. So combined with Chromium, like the core of the browser, right, you can even build cross-platform desktop apps in pure JavaScript. So there's a lot you can do in JavaScript, right? But for us, right, it's the front-end technology. So let's walk through how a web page builds. You've got HTML, JavaScript, and CSS on the client side. You've also got a server side. So what does this look like? On one side, you have a browser, right? That might be Chrome running on my laptop, right? On the other side, you've got a server, right? This might be in a server rack in AWS, right? It might be, you know, just a computer next to mine, right? A server is just a computer, right? So if I, you know, that server might be running Python, Ruby. There might just be a folder of stuff on there that's sitting behind Apache or Nginx. There's got to be some running process to actually be listening for requests. That could be Apache or Nginx or these web frameworks, right? Python and Ruby. You can have web servers running in those. There's a whole bunch of different stacks that can be running on the server. Fundamentally, right, they're going to be responding to requests. So if we want a web page, right, we're going to send a GET request, probably at port 80 to some specific IP address, right? If we send a domain name, right, that'll resolve via DNS to an IP address. So if, you know, we press google.com, right, that's actually going to translate via our closest domain name server. Our browser will go find a domain name server, translate that to an IP address, and go make a get port 80 on that IP address. So that's the request that's coming through. It's going to request the HTML here, right? So the server, right, is going to receive that request, and it's going to send some HTML back. It's going to actually respond with a packet of information, and that packet's going to have some headers, right? And then it's going to have some content in there. The content is going to be the HTML itself, right? So in the simplest case, right, it's going to send just a block of text. That block of text is HTML. It's rendered as HTML. The headers on that response could say actually that the content type was HTML, so our browser knew what to do with it. And our browser gets that HTML block, and then it goes and renders it. So it'll turn H1 is a top level header, says my awesome web page, right? We'll get a browser that says my awesome web page, right? But no styles here. This is just plain HTML, right? It can get a little more complex than that. So if the server responded, you can see the difference here is there's a script tag with some JavaScript, right? Just a commented my JavaScript line. But what's going to happen now is that text object that was returned, still just a big chunk of text, right? That was returned with a single response, right? The browser is going to go ahead and render the page and then execute that JavaScript, right? Once it gets to it in rendering that page, it's going to go ahead and run it. You know, and of course that JavaScript can go do what JavaScript does, right? It can make web requests. It can go and modify the page. It can draw a visualization, right? Another way to load it, right? If we sent this block of text back, right? There's no actual JavaScript code that we sent back. There's just a link to it. So the browser is going to go ahead and render our page. At the same time, it's going to make an asynchronous request. It's going to say, oh, hey, I needed this JavaScript file. It's going to go request it, right? So here with the / it's going to go request it from the same server. It's going to make a GET request for myjs.js. That's going to be returned, right? And then the browser is going to execute that JavaScript and, you know, re-render as needed. So, right, it's going to go ahead and rebuild that page with the JavaScript. Things get more complex from here, but this is really the core, right? Requests are going back and forth. Requests and responses are going back and forth for different files, and then JavaScript is what's actually being run by the browser itself. The browser is running the JavaScript, and all that's happening in the browser itself. That's how the web request works.